start by telling their life story. So I'll tell you a little bit of my life story, because it really has three parts. It has a part which is decades. So in the 1990s, I started a program at MIT called System Design and Management. Then I started a program a few years later in the Aero-Astro department on undergraduate education. Then I started a program called CDIO, which is now an international program of universities working together to improve engineering education. I realized I left off the International Space University, now in Strasbourg, France. Then about here, there's the Gordon program on engineering leadership. And now there's SkyTech. So these are educational programs that I've started. Then there's companies that I've started. There's, let's see, ACX. ACX is stands for Active Control Expert. And it was about applying the technology that we developed from NASA for optical systems in space to systems on the Earth. And we sold this company to a company called Cymer that manufactures semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So the problems of optical control in space and the problems of optical control in semiconductor manufacturing, photolithography, are very similar. So the second company that we started was about here, called bioscale.com. You can look that up. And this company was started with a license from a national laboratory based on a microelectronic mechanical device, MEMS. And it now builds the world's most sensitive detector for proteins. Right? But inside the device is another vibrating controlled membrane. And we measure the change in mass of this membrane by the change in the frequency of the resonance. Right? So we can get 1 part in 10 to the minus 7 change in frequency. We can measure. So then there was a company called Carrot, which is a company I started with my wife, that does financial management and investing. Then there's a company called DataZoo, which you can find online, datazoo.com. And this company takes an algorithm that we developed to explore space, to design space missions, which is a combination of decision theory and machine learning. And it applies it to the problem of choosing the advertisement to put in front of you when you go to a website. You may know when you call for cars.com that the page comes up in about 100 milliseconds. And in the first 20 milliseconds, there's actually an online auction to bid for the right to put an ad in front of you. And we're one of the companies that participates in buying in that auction. Millions of bids per minute. And we collect and store all of the information that's available about you on the internet in order to optimize the bid for the advertisement. All based on an algorithm developed for NASA. Then the last company is called Ecotrope. And Ecotrope is a company that chooses what type of walls and windows and doors and foundation you would put in a building in order to maximize the return on investment for energy costs. Right? So for example, if we had a very thin wall, it would be inexpensive to build, but we'd lose a lot of heat. We add some thickness to the wall becomes more expensive, we lose less heat. We make the wall more expensive, the wall thicker, it becomes more expensive, but we lose less heat still. Where's the optimum? Based on the next 20 years of energy costs for the building. Based on a different algorithm developed for NASA for the design of spacecraft. So, not counting Carrot, 4 companies, none of them have anything to do with space. But all of them are developed based on technologies that were invented for space. Then the third thing is space. So way back here, I was a student and a professor. And let's see, about here, I started coming to Moscow, to Mayi. Then by here, we have the Clinton space station, commission. So this was the commission that recommended to President Clinton that we try to bring together the Russian and American space station programs that produced the so-called International Space Station. Right? So I was a member of this commission. Then I was the head of Aero and Astro at MIT. And then here we have the Obama Space Commission, where we recommended to retire the shuttle, build a new missile, build a new rocket launcher, and prepare to go to Mars. And someplace in here I left off Orbital Sciences Corporation, where I became a member of the Board of Trustees. And this is about the 6th largest space company in the US. About $1.5 billion a year of spacecraft and rockets. So, a few things you notice. One is I like to start things. Right? In education, I started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. In industry, I started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So I call SkyTech my 11th startup. So what have I learned in this life? One, it's really easy to start things. Two, it's really hard to start things in space. Space is about the most difficult area, maybe along with nuclear, to start new ventures. The other thing I've learned, I think, is a little bit about how to start things. And I would say that there are about 3 views of how to train young people to be entrepreneurs. And most of my remarks tonight are aimed at the young people, excuse me.
I am.
Oh, you're still a young
I
people.
am.
Okay.
I'm still starting.
We're all young.
I'm still starting.
We're all young, good, I like that. I would say that for many years, we taught people a model of entrepreneurship which is mostly wrong. And it's a model that says that the first thing you do is write a plan, the business plan. And you try to build your company based on this plan. And I think that this is a model which was created by people who understand how big companies work, who are trying to explain how new companies work. You have to write a business plan, but don't ever do what you say to do, that you're going to do in the business plan. It's almost certain to lead to failure. So there's this guy, my good friend, whose name I keep forgetting. That's what I'm gonna check. Steve Blank. Have you heard Steve Blank? Yeah, he was in Moscow, I think, about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I strongly recommend that you read his work, even though he's from Stanford. And I think he has a much more correct, a much more true view of how companies start, new companies start. And it basically is the idea that starting a company is a little like an experiment or a series of experiments, right? Did he give this lecture? Yeah. That you make some assumptions, some postulate, and you collect some information to test it. And then, based on your results, you make some more decisions and some more postulates. So it's sort of a set of experiments, of testing. I think, to me, this makes much more sense than the old model. So go and read some things by Steve Blank. He's written 3 or 4 books. He has some very good YouTube videos. So then there's the third way of thinking about it, which I would say is the way I think about it, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And other people think this way too. And the basic difference is that Steve Blank tells you what to do. And I like to think about who you need to be. Who do you need to be a successful entrepreneur? What's in here? What's in here? What's in here? Because you need all of these. You need a good head, and you need a good heart, and you need a lot of muscle to be a good entrepreneur. So let me talk about this. And the theme that I talk about is actually not entrepreneurship, it's leadership. Because an entrepreneur is a technical business leader. So let's talk about leadership. So first, what does the word mean? So without having a long debate, I'll give you a standard definition of leadership. It's a reciprocal relationship between an individual and a group where the leader exerts influence to accomplish shared objectives, dealing with change or transformation. Now, I say this, this is important to start, because most students actually don't understand this. You see, real leadership is when you don't have control. Real leadership is exerting influence without control. So you want to think about how you're going to influence people around you. Okay, so now I'm going to stop at each one of these and say, if we were starting a space company, what would this mean? Who's the group? So this is going to be a discussion, so please answer. The staff, right? That's one group. And what other groups are there?
Engineers, maybe.
The customers, well, the engineers would be the staff. So we have the staff, the customers,
And organizers of this event, of this company.
the organizer. Who's the organizer? You're the organizer. You're the organizer. The shareholders, the investors,
Government.
and perhaps the
Government
government.
officials to give money.
Right, and perhaps the government officials. So it isn't just one group that you have to be the leader of. You have to think about your team. You have to think about your investors. You have to think about your customers. You have to think about the government who might invest or might regulate. Okay. So you're the individual, and what kind of influence do you create?
You gather these people together.
You
Maybe.
gather them together, you inspire them, you motivate them, and you guide their technical and business decisions. And what's the change that you're trying to bring about?
Change the world.
You're trying to change the world
Make it a better place.
and make it a better place. That's in the big view.
You try to establish something new which never existed before.
You're trying to create something new, right? And maybe make some money, hopefully. Okay. So it's reciprocal influence to accomplish shared objectives. Shared objectives. The shared objectives with the team are to produce something and make money. The shared objectives with the investors are to make money for them. The shared objectives for the customers is to give them something new, something they haven't had. Right? And it's about change or transformation. So what's the difference between management and leadership? So you can go to this great university in Skolkovo called the Skolkovo Business School. Школа управления. I think I already said that. And you, what do they teach you at the business school, or at most business schools? They teach you management. Management is keeping very complex organizations running well. Leadership is starting something new. So I like to think that management is keeping the trains running on time. Leadership is making new track to go to new places. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a leader. You have to be prepared to make new tracks, not just keep the trains running. And this old model of entrepreneurship was this model based on the idea of keeping the trains running, that you can write a plan for the next few years in a company that's never existed before. Okay, what's an engineer? This is my old school MIT. What's an engineer? What does an engineer do?
Engineers developing
Create some
new
new-
technique devices.
So engineers create something new. What do scientists do? They do research, but what kind of research? What's the outcome of their research? Ideas for engineers.
And new ways to create new
No.
vehicles.
No, scientists don't create anything new.
But they give,
Discover something.
They discover something. You see, until 100 years ago, at least in English, the word for science was natural history. They discover the history of nature. Science is about finding things that have always been. Engineers create things that never were. It's a very clear distinction. So, von Karman, my great-grandfather, said this. It's not really my great-grandfather. He was the thesis supervisor of the thesis supervisor of my thesis supervisor. So he's my academic great-grandfather. My academic grandfather is a guy named Sen. C.C. Sen. Anyone ever heard of him?
no, unfortunately no.
He created the ballistic missile program of the People's Republic of China. And von Karman helped create the ballistic missile program of the US. So in my family tree, I have 2 ballistic missile programs. So engineering, the engineering experience is one of design, innovation, imagination, and contribution. It helps to shape the future. So this is what we try to do as an entrepreneur, as a leader. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes tonight about this model, about which I call the 4 capabilities model. It's one of my colleagues developed this. And the first important part of this is what's in here. Because if we don't have the right values, if we don't have the right attitudes, then everything else will be wasted. So let me tell you what I think these are. The first 2 are the things that make entrepreneurs entrepreneurs. They're willing to take initiative. And they're willing to make decisions with almost no information. Because innovation means making something new. Innovation, nov. The word nov means new in Latin. So, making new things is by definition taking risk. If you don't want to take risk, don't be an entrepreneur. You have to feel ready to take risks. Whoops. And you have to have a lot of this. Right? You have to be willing to deliver, to work all day and all night and all weekend and all vacation. Because in the first few months and years of a company, you have to keep on schedule. You have to get to market. And that just takes this enormous will, this force to do it. Go and read books about writing business plans. They never talk about risk or will, right? This is who you have to be. And you have to be courageous. And you have to act ethically. You have to do the right thing. You have to trust and be loyal to your team. These are really important things for an engineer, leader. You have to be really good at working with other people. Because a small team at the beginning of a company is like a family. And we teach students in universities communication. But what we really teach them is what I'm doing now, which is broadcast, right? Lecturing, writing, right? The thing that we don't teach anywhere near enough is listening and trying to understand. If you walk around and follow an engineer or an entrepreneur in a company and watch what they do hour by hour, they spend remarkably little time doing this. What they do is they spend time talking to people, talking with staff, talking with suppliers, talking with investors, talking with customers. You have to be very effective at listening. Particularly the worst people, who are the worst listeners, professors. Because professors never have to listen to anyone. You know, they just broadcast to their students. So as a student, you actually don't have good role models of people who want to be good listeners. So this is listening, inquiry and dialogue, negotiation, compromise, advocating, working in diverse groups. You know, you have to learn to work with different kinds of people. Interpersonal skills, structured communication, that's things like that. Okay, now we really get to leadership. About 2 months ago, President Medvedev announced open government process. And he created a set of groups, I don't know quite how many, does anyone know? I think maybe 8 or 10 groups on different topics. And they had subgroups. And he wanted to hear lots of opinion about what the government should do in the next government. This was sense excuse me. This was sense-making. This was, we now have the opportunity to make a new government. So what ideas can we bring? What facts can we discover that will help us build a better government? I actually got to participate in one of these meetings. It was fabulous. So making sense is a very important thing to do when you're a leader, especially when you're a new leader. What is there around you? How do people connect? What are the important ideas? What are the important facts? Right? So when you get to a new situation, start noticing how important it is to just stop at the beginning and make sense. One of my mentors in life was, how do you say mentor?
Spiritual.
That's not quite mentor, that's spiritual leader. A mentor is like a senior advisor.
Наставник.
One of my mentors in life was a president of MIT. And he told me that when he got to MIT, for the first month, all he did was have people come into his office one by one and tell them about the issues of MIT. He spent an entire month just collecting views of MIT. He was making sense of MIT. He'd never worked there. So when you get to a new situation, stop and make sense. what do engineers make sense of? They make sense of society and the natural context, nature. They try to understand what their customers need. They try and understand about the organization they're in. And they try and understand about new technology. Right? Entrepreneurs are always watching for new technology. Right? Because when a new piece of technology comes up, or you invent it, then you start to say, how could I use this? The next thing leaders do, is they make visions. And the great leaders have made great visions. And you can think about some of the people in your life or in history who have created great visions of the future. They can be political leaders, they can be moral leaders, they can be business leaders. So who do you think of as business leaders now who are able to make great visions? Who would come to mind? Vexelberg. I'll tell if you said that.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Almost everybody says this. Right? If you want to look at a business leader who has unfortunately just died, but if you want to look at a recent business leader who basically absolutely created a vision of the business he was in, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Right? You want to predict the future? Invent it. Right? That's the way a person who creates visions think. Right? So what do engineering leaders create visions of? They create technical visions. Right? They create visions of new products and visions of new services. Right? You know, you have to think back. See, you're getting bored and you're all using this, right? Sorry, I'm making you bored. So, you know, it's fairly easy now to think, I have a 4S. What's the vision of a 5? But what was it like to make the vision of the first cell phone? You know, there was a time, we remember, but we're still young. There was a time when we didn't have cell phones. Does anyone believe that?
I believe in it.
Yeah, you see, but it's hard for you to imagine. You know the definition of technology? Technology is things that were invented after you were born. Right? Because if it was invented before you're born, it's just always been there. I mean, none of us think of automobiles as technology. They've always been there. So the really challenging visions are not to create the ones, you know, the next Kontakte. Right? We've already got Kontakte, we've already got Facebook, we've already got LinkedIn, we've already got a lot of them. Right? I can't keep track of all of them that I'm on. Right? The challenge is to create the visions of the next type of thing that will be on the web. That's visioning. And then more of this, more of delivering, of actually making the thing work. And I'll tell you, this is the really hard part. You know, pulling together the team, relating to people, that's always going on. Making sense, sometimes you can do it in a few days, a few weeks, a few months. Creating a vision, when you have it, you have it. But delivering. And delivering something that works. and delivering something that works every time, and delivering something that works every time, all the time, even when it's too hot, or too cold, or the pressure is too high, or the material is not as strong as it should be, and delivering it inexpensively, on schedule. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs are really good at making the prototype. But the real heart of making a successful business is making the prototype really work, and inexpensively, and so that it works well. Right? When we launch satellites into space, we only get one chance. If the launch goes wrong, if the satellite doesn't work, right? This isn't like software. You know, if the software doesn't work, you reboot. Right? You can't reboot a rocket. You only get one chance. And often the thing on the top of the rocket cost hundreds of millions of dollars. One chance. It's got to work really well every time. In the entire history of the last century, the highest launch rate reliability was achieved by the Semyorka. 98.5%. Amazing record.
Rolex. Rolex.
The Rolex? The Rolex of rockets, right? Yeah. So, delivering on the vision. We have to be able to invent new things, we have to build new things, and we have to implement and operate them well. Okay, now I'm tiring out the pedagogic. So we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to try to apply this to space. So we're actually going to invent something tonight. Ready? So start thinking during the break of what you have to make sense of. What vision can we have? And what plan can we make for delivering on the vision? So I'm serious. By the end of tonight, we'll invent a new product for space. Maybe several. Okay? What, 10 minutes, you think?